Hello friends, welcome to Java Tech Guides. So in this video, we are going to discuss about different type of services in Spring Boot and the Spring provided annotations to support those services and the parameter the request details which we can pass from front end to back end uh, for those services. There is mainly five types of services we generally have, that is the gate service, post service, put service, delete service, and patch service. So we'll go one by one, and uh, we'll see what things we have in the Spring to supports, and what are the supported input types we have for those services. The gate service uses HTTP GET protocol, uh, and Spring gives us a @gate mapping annotation to define a service as gate services. The request headers. So this gate service supports request header, request parameter, and the request body. So the request headers mainly we send the service metadata like authentication, authorization details, and all. So those details are sent through request headers. So basically those are the request metadatas, and this request parameter is the thing we pass through the URL as a request parameter. So basically this is very little data about the services. So let's say employee ID, we are passing it through request parameter, and the request body is the whole request data we use to a process. So this request body is not supported by the gate services. So we only have two options to send the data from the client to backend. So that is the request header. So this is basically used for sending the metadata, and these are the request param is the only thing uh, we send for that request for that service. So now coming to the post method. So generally, no, one point I forgot to mention: the gate services are used to fetch data from the server to the client. And now coming to the post method, right? Post services. So the post services uses post method of HTTP protocol. So Spring provided @post mapping annotation to define a post services in Spring, and the post services supports request header, request parameter, request body also. So the mainly the request body is the whole request details, request detail we are going we use to process. Now coming to the put. So the post generally used to create a resource or create a entity in the backend. So mainly you can say the resource. So this is generally used to create the uh, new resources. The put mapping. So so the put service, right? So generally put services are used to update the records in the backend. Let's say we have a employee record, and we want to update most of the fields of that employee. Then we will use put services for those scenarios. Now Spring provided us put mapping to define a service as a put services. So put service also supports request header, request parameter, and request body, because we are going to update the record, right? Update the entity, update the resource. So the request body is needed for that. Now the delete mapping. So by seeing this delete, right? So the delete services are used to delete the resources from the backend. Now Spring provided us other delete mapping to define a service as a delete service. um, Sorry guys, request. So delete services also supports request header and request parameter, no, but not the request body, because we are going to delete some resource, so there is no need to send the whole details of that resource in the body. So we can send the minimal details to delete those resources. Now coming to the patch service, right? Now coming to the patch service. So generally patch services are used to update, like similar to put, but when we need, we are in a scenario where we are going to update some of the fields of a resource. Let's say employee name, there is a correction in the employee name, right? In that case we used to consume the patch services. So that means for minimal update, first minimal update we will use patch services. Now Spring provided us patch mapping, at the rate patch mapping to define a patch services. Now patch services also supports request header, request parameter, and request body, and all of these are the specific annotations for specific services. But this request mapping annotation is the superset of all these annotations. So we can define any of this service type by using request mapping annotation. So this mapping annotation also supports request header, request param, and depending upon the service type or the method we define in the request mapping annotation, so the request body sometimes supported or sometimes not supported. So that's all about the definitions, what I can say, the definitions of the services, and we'll next go one by one to, to this service implementation. Generally basically we'll implement each of the services in our application, and we'll see what and how the service is behaving, or how to implement those services in our code. Okay, let me open the Eclipse to implement those services one by one. So this is our old project we have created in our previous video. So if you want to see the steps to create a Spring Boot application, so please check the ping button. Now let me create a new controller for our example. So that is the employee controller. Let me create it first. Okay. Now the class is created, so we know, right? We know to define a service in Spring Boot, we have two things, two annotations to use, right? We can use take use of two annotations, that is the controller annotation and the REST controller annotations. The controller annotation and the REST controller annotations. Okay, I'll use @ REST controller annotation to define our services, because it is more handy to define um, RESTful services in Spring. So this is our controller. Let me, so first we'll check, we'll try to implement the get mapping, get services first, and we'll see what we are having, and what will be getting, or how will we describe, implementing the get services. So let me define a service, define a method, so which will eventually return a string hello world. Let's say get mapping, the method name. Now we have return hello, and then will pass a request parameter to the service and will check. So to pass the request parameter, we have a annotation that is called the request param annotation, and we have to give the name for that param. Let's say name. Now we have to define the type and the variable name. No, this is um, for the request param definition, right? So let me append the name. So whatever we will pass the name, so the service will respond with hello and name. Now I'm giving it to get mapping, and here we have to give the path URL for that get mapping. Let's say get mapping. Okay, let me save the file, and now the service the application also reloaded because of the dev tool. Now let us check. So this is a tool, right? This is a tool called Postman to check the services. So we can hit the services from here by passing the parameters like, let's say, request body, request parameter, and request headers. So by adding those details here, we can consume those services from this application. That is the Postman. So another application was there, that is the plugin, that Chrome plugin, that is Advanced REST Client. You can also take use of that, or you can use that to test your services. But for me, this is very handy, so I am using it. So our service is running on 8080 port. Now let me. So we have defined our services, right? Gate mapping. Our parameter is gate mapping. Now, okay. Now this is the whole URL. Let me give the name of, let's say, equals to. So this let's Java Tech Guides. So so this is the name of the request parameter, and this is the value. So let me hit the services now. See, we have the response, uh, that is hello Java Tech Guides. So get services generally gives the return 200 status. Okay. Now coming to the header, right? So let me add the header also to check whether we are able to pass the header or not. So Spring has provided us a um, annotation, that is request header, to capture the header header details from the request. So let me define a, let's say, um, auth number. So I am defining it as an integer. So integer auth number. Okay. Now I am also appending it with after the name to check whether we are getting the value or not. Now I have added it. Now the service is also restarted. Now let me add the header, that is the auth number. So let's say 1234. Now if we'll send the request also processed. Now here we have the 1234. So this that way, right? So these are the two ways. So the request parameter and the request header. So by which we can pass any data from the client to server. Now coming to the the post method, right? So before going to the post method, let me create a class employee. So then generally this is a VO class. So this is Java bean, you can say employee class. So this employee class will have only some fields, that is a private string name, private integer, the full employee ID. So let's have only two fields. So you can add other fields too, but let's have two fields for as of now. Okay. Now after this, right, we will define the post services. So let me create the method public, um, let's say employee create employee. So we have to give the URL parameter for the post mapping also. So let me give it, that is the post mapping. Now for the post mapping, right, we need the payload, you can say the requested details by which will create the resource in our backend. So for our case, we have to pass the whole employee object, whole employee details from the back, from the front end. Let's say the employee ID, or employee name, employee first name, employee last name. So all those things we have to pass from the front end to back end to create the resource in our database or in our service. So for that we cannot pass it through the request parameter or request header, because this employee data may be huge, right? So that it's not possible to pass those data through a request parameter or request header. So in such scenario, Spring also gives us a annotation request body annotation. So by defining this, we are telling Spring that the employee object itself will come in our request. So now, so the request mapping uh, is to tell the Spring controller or Spring controller to map the employee for the request from in the request, you can say. So now to check if our service is working correctly or not, let me um, add so let me add the employee ID here and return the same in the response. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll send only the employee name here, and the system will also add the employee ID and return it to our client. So let me create a new request here for the post mapping. Okay, now what we have, post mapping. Earlier we saw that how to pass the header and the parameter. Now we'll be sending it through the body itself. So let me now let me click on the body, and we will be using JSON data type to send the data. So we have the field, right? In the employee class we have the field name. So we will be passing that name here, and name and the value, you can say. This is the field name and this is the value. The Java Tech Guides. So you have to change the HTTP method here to test. I'm sending it now. You can see, right? This is the name we are sending, and this is the employee ID is appended from the backend. If we want to check one more time, we can change this to um, 10, and let me hit it again. So now see, we have the updated value. So that is all about the mapping, post mapping. Now coming to the put mapping, right? So this should be the same as post mapping. So let me copy those, so copy that method and change accordingly. So that is the update employee, and we have to change the annotation here. That is the put mapping. Now we are ready to test the service. Okay, let me change it to 100, and will be okay. Let me copy, me create a duplicate for put mapping. Put mapping. So this is our URL. Now to test it, right? Now we are setting the ID, right? The ID to 100 in our put services. So let me, the name is welcome to Java Tech Guide, and the ID, employee ID, as 100. So let's see if that is this request um, is mapped to the port mapping or not. So let me change the HTTP method type to put. Now sending it to the backend. Now see, those values are updated. So because we are sending it, and the employee ID is updating from backend. Now coming to the delete. So similarly, we have the delete mapping. We have the delete mapping, and here we have to pass the ID. Let's say we are sending the ID of that employee in the request parameter, and we want to delete that employee from our backend system or from our database. So let me try to change, let me change the, so this would be a void because we are only deleting those services. Now to check whether this service is consumed or not, I will be adding a system out log here, that is the delete employee called. So this is to check, only check whether that service is called or not. Successfully we are able to call that service or not. This is nothing else. Okay. So I am also printing, adding that, also adding the employee ID here for our better understanding if that request parameter is also coming or not. So I have saved the services. Let me create a duplicate request for delete mapping. So delete mapping, here we will not send any body request body, and here we'll be sending the employee ID as a request parameter. Now let me change the method type, HTTP method type. So this is delete, and see we are getting the 200. Okay, and let's check the log. See, we can see the delete employee called 123. Let me change the value one more time and call it. Now we can see this is the delete method called. Now we have left only one type of service, that is the patch. So let's say that is patch mapping. Update, let me change it to update employee name. Okay, no, let me set the employee ID also because we are going to check. Okay, so in this method what will be doing, so because we are testing, right, we don't have any actual implementation for these methods. Let's say if you want to change the employee name, then you have to call the call the database and update the name there and send the response back. But here we are not using that type of implementation, right? So we are only checking whether this pass mapping is the request body or request parameter or the data is coming from the front end or not. So for that I will be only checking uh, by changing the employee ID here. So let me create a duplicate for pass mapping. Okay, this is the URL we have defined for pass mapping. Now for the body, I'm not sending the employee ID here, and I'm sending only the name and hitting the services. So now see the backend. So it's coming from the backend. We are only sending the name. The employee ID is appended from the backend. So that is all about this video. We'll be discussing the So we have only left the request mapping. So this would be a longer video to define each and every component of that request mapping. So we'll be discussing this in later video. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe for more videos.